I never imagined my peaceful morning in the garden would unravel my life completely. One playful moment with our loyal dog, Rex, turned into an incident so bizarre and shocking that it shook the foundation of my marriage. As my husband, Brian, walked in, the look on his face wasn't just disbelief, it was betrayal. In that instant, I realized everything I knew about trust and love could change forever. It was 1970, a year when life felt simple yet full of subtle shifts. My name is Lisa, a 28-year-old homemaker who finds solace in nurturing our small, cozy home and tending to my beloved garden. The soil under my fingers was a connection to something real, something constant, in a world that sometimes felt unpredictable. My husband, Brian, is a hard-working mechanic, passionate about restoring classic cars. His hands, always stained with grease, speak of his dedication to his craft. Our days were predictable, filled with the routine of Brian's long hours at the garage and my moments of quiet solitude. In the evenings, we'd share stories over simple dinners, his tired but warm smile assuring me of our bond. Together, we built a life centered on love, trust, and a mutual sense of security. Our third family member was Rex, our playful and loyal German Shepherd. Rex had been with us since he was a pup, a constant source of joy and companionship. His wagging tail and mischievous antics often filled our home with laughter, especially during moments when Brian and I needed it most. But beneath this picture-perfect life, I sometimes felt a quiet loneliness. Brian's late nights and growing preoccupation with his projects left me with my thoughts more often than not. The garden became my refuge, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of planting and watering, away from the lingering feeling that something in our lives was shifting. That morning was like any other, or so I thought. The sun rose over our little home, bathing the garden in golden light. Rex's tail thumped against the ground as I dug my fingers into the soil, imagining the vibrant blooms of spring. Brian had left early for the garage, his absence a familiar part of my days. I was content in my solitude, or at least I convinced myself of it. But the seeds I planted that day wouldn't just grow into flowers, they would mark the last moment of peace before everything began to unravel. As the sound of tires crunching on the gravel announced Brian's unexpected return, I couldn't have known that life as I knew it was about to change forever. The day Brian returned home unexpectedly, something in the air shifted. I could feel it even before he spoke. He walked toward me with hurried steps, his face etched with a strain I hadn't seen before. His words, "We need to talk," hung heavy in the air, leaving my heart racing. Whatever he was about to say, I knew it would change everything. Brian had been distant for weeks. His late nights at the garage were no longer about overtime, they felt like an escape. I noticed the small changes first. He avoided eye contact more often. His usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a quiet, almost brooding energy. Even Rex, our ever-attentive shepherd, seemed to pick up on the tension, his knowing eyes following Brian's every move. It wasn't just Brian. I found myself doubting things I'd once taken for granted. The way he lingered on phone calls that abruptly ended when I entered the room. The hushed conversations that left me feeling like an outsider in my own home. I brushed off my unease, convincing myself that I was overthinking, but the doubts clung to me like a shadow. That morning in the garden, my suspicions felt like tiny seeds growing roots. Brian's sudden presence, his unexpected urgency, only made them sprout. He announced he'd been offered a job in California, a big opportunity, but one that required uprooting our lives. His words should have filled me with excitement, but instead, they deepened my unease. Why had he decided this without even discussing it with me? "I want us to go together, Lisa," he said, his voice steady but his eyes searching mine, as if gauging my reaction. But I couldn't help wondering, was this move about a fresh start or running away? And if so, what was he running from, or toward? The doubts gnawed at me, but I didn't voice them. Instead, I nodded and told him I needed time to think. Later that day, as I prepared Rex's bath, the routine task felt like a welcome distraction. Rex bounded into the bathroom with his usual excitement, his tail wagging and his playful energy momentarily easing my tension. But even in that simple moment, I felt the weight of my uncertainty. Brian's behavior, his sudden urgency to leave everything behind, it all felt like a puzzle I couldn't piece together. My heart ached with the possibility that the life we'd built might not be as solid as I'd believed. As the bathwater splashed and Rex's playful antics filled the room, I tried to push my doubts aside. But when Brian stepped into the bathroom unexpectedly, his eyes lingering on me and Rex, a tension I couldn't explain filled the space. His laughter at the water spraying everywhere seemed forced, and the way he looked at me carried an edge I couldn't ignore. That night, lying in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. What was Brian not telling me? Was this just a job opportunity, or was there something more, something he wasn't ready to admit? I wanted to believe him, to trust in the love we'd shared for years, but the cracks in our foundation were growing wider by the day. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and no matter how much I tried to ignore them, they had taken root. Something was shifting in our lives, and deep down, I feared that the changes ahead would test our marriage in ways I wasn't sure we were ready to face. The days following Brian's sudden announcement felt like a blur, each moment tinged with an unspoken tension. He buried himself in preparations for the move, but his demeanor oscillated between excitement and unease. Meanwhile, I tried to convince myself that this upheaval was just a challenge we could overcome. Yet, beneath it all, the cracks in our relationship widened, and with them came a strange and unsettling vulnerability. Rex, ever the loyal companion, seemed to sense my inner turmoil. One afternoon, while Brian was out finalizing paperwork, I found myself sitting in the garden, staring blankly at the soil I had once loved to nurture. Rex padded over, his tail wagging softly, his head resting on my lap as if offering silent comfort. I buried my fingers in his fur, letting the steady rhythm of his breathing ground me, yet my thoughts drifted to places I didn't want to explore. That evening, while giving Rex his bath, the air seemed charged with something I couldn't name. I scrubbed his fur methodically, trying to lose myself in the task. Rex, playful as ever, splashed water everywhere, his excitement bringing a rare smile to my face. But as he leaned closer, his wet nose brushing my cheek, a strange warmth spread through me, a sensation I quickly dismissed as misplaced affection for a loyal friend. Then Brian walked in. His gaze lingered on us for a moment too long, his eyes narrowing in a way I hadn't seen before. "Need help?" he asked, his tone light but his expression anything but. I shook my head, forcing a laugh to break the tension. "Just finishing up," I said, my voice betraying a tremor I couldn't suppress. He stayed anyway, leaning against the doorframe, watching as I dried Rex's fur. The silence between us felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. When I accidentally brushed against Brian while reaching for a towel, his hand instinctively steadied me, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I saw something in his gaze that I couldn't define: confusion, perhaps, or doubt. The following days were marked by an awkward dance of avoidance. Brian's mood darkened, his responses curt and his presence distant. I, in turn, found solace in Rex's unwavering loyalty, though I couldn't shake the feeling that our bond was under an uncomfortable scrutiny. Every glance from Brian seemed to question what I couldn't even begin to articulate. One evening, while Brian was working late, I took Rex out for a walk. The cool air did little to clear my mind, and every step felt weighted by the tension at home. As we strolled down a quiet path, I caught myself leaning into the comfort Rex provided, his steady pace, his watchful eyes. It was easy, too easy, to let that comfort fill the growing void left by Brian's absence. But when we returned home, Brian was waiting. His expression was hard, his jaw set, and his eyes immediately went to Rex. "Long walk?" he asked, his tone casual but his gaze piercing. I nodded, unsure of what to say. The room felt stifling as he stepped closer, his eyes darting between me and Rex. "What's going on, Lisa?" he asked suddenly, his voice low but firm. The question caught me off guard, and I stumbled over my words, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" I finally managed, my heart racing. His gaze didn't waver. "You've been distant." "And Rex?" he paused, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just this move getting to me." I wanted to reach for him, to reassure him, but the distance between us felt insurmountable. "Brian, you're overthinking things," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. He nodded, but the doubt in his eyes didn't fade. That night, lying beside him, I couldn't sleep. The weight of his words and the tension between us hung heavy in the air. Every small movement felt amplified, every breath a reminder of the growing divide. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that whatever was happening, we could work through it. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what was happening, or how to stop it. In the quiet hours before dawn, I found myself staring at Rex, his sleeping form curled up at the foot of the bed. His loyalty was unquestionable, his presence a constant source of comfort. But the lines between comfort and something else, something I couldn't quite define, had begun to blur. And as much as I wanted to deny it, the feelings I couldn't name had begun to seep into the spaces Brian and I used to share. The morning it all came crashing down started like any other. The golden light of dawn filtered through the curtains as I prepared to bathe Rex. It was a ritual I'd come to cherish, a moment of quiet connection amidst the turbulence of my relationship with Brian. But that day, a series of seemingly ordinary events would culminate in a revelation I could never have anticipated. Rex bounded into the bathroom with his usual excitement, his tail wagging furiously as he splashed into the tub. I laughed despite myself, the sound a brief reprieve from the tension that had been clouding my life. As I scrubbed his fur, my thoughts wandered to Brian, his distant demeanor, the doubts in his eyes. I told myself we just needed time, that once we moved to California, things would get better. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Then it happened. Rex, in his playful exuberance, suddenly lunged forward, his paws landing on my shoulders with more force than I expected. I lost my balance, slipping into the tub with a splash as water cascaded onto the floor. Startled, I tried to push him back, laughing nervously at the chaos. But in that instant, the bathroom door creaked open, and there stood Brian. His face froze, a mixture of confusion, anger, and something I couldn't quite place. The laughter died in my throat as his gaze darted between Rex and me. "Lisa," he said, his voice low and edged with disbelief. "What the hell is going on?" I scrambled to my feet, water dripping from my soaked clothes as I tried to explain. "Brian, it's not what it looks like. Rex was just playing, he knocked me over. It was an accident." But his expression didn't change. He stepped further into the bathroom, his presence filling the space with a suffocating weight. "An accident," he repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. "Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like that." My heart pounded as I searched for the right words, but nothing I said seemed to penetrate the wall of doubt that had risen between us. "Brian, please," I pleaded, stepping closer, but he held up a hand to stop me. "I need a minute," he muttered, his voice tight. He turned and left the room, leaving me standing there, drenched and trembling. The air felt cold, the warmth of the bath long forgotten. I followed him into the living room, where he stood with his back to me, his shoulders tense. "Brian," I began, but he cut me off. "Do you have any idea what that looked like?" he asked, his voice rising. "I walk in, and I see you." He stopped, his hands running through his hair as he struggled to find the words. "With Rex. And you expect me to just brush it off?" Tears filled my eyes as I shook my head. "You're not listening to me. It wasn't anything like that." He got excited, and I lost my balance. That's all it was. But the hurt in his eyes told me he wasn't ready to believe me. "I've seen dogs play, Lisa," he said, his voice cold. And that wasn't just playing. The room seemed to spin as the weight of his accusation settled over me. "Brian, you're wrong," I said, my voice shaking. "I would never. Rex is just a dog. You know me." "I thought I did," he said quietly, his words cutting deeper than any shout could have. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door. "I need space, Lisa. I can't deal with this right now." The sound of the door slamming behind him echoed through the empty house, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the crushing realization that my marriage was teetering on the edge of collapse. For hours, I sat in silence, replaying the scene in my mind. The look on Brian's face haunted me, a mix of anger and betrayal that I couldn't shake. I knew the truth, that it was nothing more than an innocent, albeit chaotic, moment. But the line between perception and reality had blurred, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap. When Brian finally returned, his expression was unreadable. He stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the floor. "We need to talk," he said, his voice weary. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "Please, Brian. Let me explain." He sat across from me, his posture rigid as he waited for me to speak. I poured out my heart, recounting every detail of what had happened, my voice breaking as I begged him to believe me. "I love you, Brian," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I would never do anything to hurt you, or us." He listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "Lisa, I want to believe you," he said, his voice soft. "But what I saw, it's hard to erase that from my mind." I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "I need time," he said. "Time to think. To figure out if I can move past this." The days that followed were a blur of loneliness and uncertainty. Brian stayed in the house but avoided me, his presence a constant reminder of the distance between us. I threw myself into the garden, seeking solace in the soil and the rhythm of planting, but nothing could fill the void he left behind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Brian came to me. "Lisa," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I've made a decision." My heart stopped as I waited for him to continue. "I want to try," he said. "I want to believe you. But if we're going to move forward, we need to rebuild the trust that's been broken. It won't be easy, but I'm willing to try if you are." Tears of relief spilled down my cheeks as I nodded. "I am," I whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes." And so, we began the slow, painful process of healing. The incident with Rex became a defining moment in our relationship, not because of what it was, but because of what it revealed. Trust, once shattered, is difficult to mend, but together, we resolved to face the challenges ahead. The journey wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And in the end, it was love, the imperfect, messy, and resilient kind, that brought us back to each other. In the aftermath of that day, the house felt colder, quieter, as if the very walls were mourning the loss of the connection Brian and I once shared. Every room carried the echo of unspoken words, every glance between us was tinged with an unease that neither of us could fully articulate. The once easy rhythm of our relationship had been disrupted, replaced by a fragile, awkward dance around the edges of our shared pain. Brian moved into the guest room. It wasn't an official separation, but it felt like one. His absence from our bed was a constant reminder of the growing chasm between us. I tried to approach him, to mend what had been broken, but every attempt was met with quiet resistance. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't open either. It was as though he was protecting himself from further pain by keeping me at arm's length. I threw myself into the garden, my refuge in times of distress. The soil beneath my hands was grounding, a reminder of life cycles, of growth, decay, and renewal. Rex stayed by my side, his loyal presence a comfort in the silence that had taken over the house. Yet, even Rex seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. His usual playful antics were subdued, his eyes watching me with an almost human understanding. The fallout wasn't confined to the walls of our home. Friends noticed the change in us, their concerned questions met with vague reassurances. "We're just going through a rough patch," I would say, forcing a smile. But I knew they could see through my words, just as I could see through Brian's. We were both struggling to hold on, but neither of us knew how to bridge the gap. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Brian finally broke the silence. "Lisa," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "we need to talk." My heart raced as I turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Okay," I said, bracing myself for whatever was coming. He gestured for me to sit, and for the first time in weeks, we sat across from each other at the dining table. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his hands folded in front of him. "About us, about what happened." I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally, his voice breaking. "But what I saw, it's hard to get past. It wasn't just about that moment, it was about trust. And right now, I don't know if I can trust what I feel anymore." Tears filled my eyes as I reached for his hand. "Brian, I know it looked bad, but I swear, it wasn't what you think. I would never betray you, Not like that. Please, let me prove it to you. He hesitated, his gaze searching mine. I want to believe you, Lisa. I really do. But it's not just about believing, it's about feeling secure, about knowing that what we have is real and unshakable. Over the next few weeks, we tried to rebuild what had been broken. We went on walks together, talked more openly than we had in years, and even brought in a professional dog trainer to work with Rex. It wasn't just about fixing the immediate issue, it was about addressing the deeper fractures in our relationship, the ones that had existed long before that fateful day. Yet, progress was slow. There were moments of hope, like when Brian would smile at me in a way that reminded me of the man I'd fallen in love with, or when we'd share a quiet moment of laughter over something Rex did. But there were also moments of doubt, when I'd catch him watching me with a look that spoke of lingering suspicion, or when a conversation would abruptly end with an awkward silence. The hardest part was facing my own guilt, not for the incident itself, but for the ways I had let the cracks in our relationship grow unnoticed. Brian's late nights, my increasing reliance on Rex for comfort, it was all part of a larger pattern, one that neither of us had been willing to confront until it was too late. As the weeks turned into months, the tension began to ease. Slowly, cautiously, Brian and I found our way back to each other. The move to California, which had once seemed like an insurmountable hurdle, became a shared goal. We started planning together, discussing the logistics of the move and dreaming about the life we could build there. But even as we moved forward, the shadow of that day lingered. It became a silent reminder of the fragility of trust, of how easily it could be shattered and how painstakingly it had to be rebuilt. We both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we were willing to walk it together. One evening, as we sat in the garden, Brian reached for my hand. "I'm sorry for pulling away," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I was scared, Lisa. Scared of losing you, of losing us." I squeezed his hand, my heart swelling with a mixture of relief and love. "We'll get through this," I said softly. "Together." Rex, lying at our feet, wagged his tail as if in agreement. The garden, once a place of solace in my solitude, had become a symbol of renewal, a reminder that even in the face of upheaval, growth was always possible. The months following our reconciliation were marked by cautious optimism and an unspoken understanding that trust, once broken, requires patience to rebuild. The incident that had threatened to dismantle our lives became a painful but pivotal moment, forcing us to confront the cracks in our relationship and rediscover the love we had almost lost. Moving to California turned into a metaphor for our journey, a leap of faith into the unknown. Packing up our home was bittersweet. Every box we filled carried the weight of memories both joyful and painful. The garden, which had been my sanctuary, now felt like a part of me I was leaving behind. But I reminded myself that the seeds I had planted there could be sown again in new soil, just as Brian and I were attempting to nurture a new chapter in our lives. When we arrived in California, the fresh start we had envisioned didn't come easily. The unfamiliarity of our new surroundings mirrored the uncertainty in our relationship. But with each passing day, we found ways to rebuild. Brian immersed himself in his new job, and I began exploring the local community, finding new places to plant my roots. Rex, our steadfast companion, was a constant reminder of the simple joys in life. His playful antics often broke the tension during our tougher moments, and his loyalty became a symbol of the bond Brian and I were working to strengthen. We even enrolled him in advanced training classes, not only to set clearer boundaries but as a way of moving forward from the incident that had shaken us to our core. The hardest part of our journey was learning to communicate honestly. We both realized how much we had taken for granted, how unspoken feelings and assumptions had quietly eroded our foundation. We began talking openly about our fears, our needs, and our shared dreams, no longer allowing silence to fill the gaps between us. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our new home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Brian turned to me. "Lisa," he said, his voice steady, "I'm sorry for doubting you, for letting my fear cloud what I know in my heart to be true." Tears welled in my eyes as I placed my hand over his. "I'm sorry too," I said. "For not seeing the ways we were drifting apart, for not speaking up sooner. But I'm glad we're here, together, rebuilding." The air between us felt lighter, the weight of the past slowly lifting. The incident with Rex, once a source of pain and confusion, had become a reminder of the fragility of trust and the importance of nurturing it with care. From that point on, our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was stronger. We embraced the lessons we had learned, the value of open communication, the necessity of addressing problems before they festered, and the power of resilience in the face of adversity. We learned that love isn't just about passion or loyalty, it's about effort, forgiveness, and the willingness to grow together. In time, the memory of that day faded into the background, not forgotten but transformed into a story we could reflect on with perspective. It became a part of our history, a chapter that shaped us but didn't define us. As I sat in our new garden, planting the first seeds in California soil, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. The scent of the earth, the warmth of the sun, and the sound of Rex's happy bark in the distance reminded me that life, like a garden, is full of cycles. And just as the flowers in my old garden had blossomed after being tended with care, so too could the love Brian and I shared. The move was more than just a change of scenery, it was a testament to our commitment to one another. Together, we had weathered the storm, emerging not unscathed but stronger, wiser, and more connected than before. If you were in Lisa's position, what would you have done? Could you forgive and rebuild trust after such a misunderstanding? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more gripping stories of love, betrayal, and redemption. And stay tuned for our next tale. You won't believe what one woman discovered in her husband's hidden drawer. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss it.